Today I'd like to take you through a piano practice strategy I came across quite recently that I've sort of nicknamed the power pause. It's a great way of helping with memorization, of fixing tricky spots, and of correcting our muscle memory when it lets us down. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. Hi, this is Tommy with Tommy's Piano Corner, the place for returning pianists, or indeed anyone who loves piano, to share tips and ideas of how to get the best from this great hobby. If it is your first trip here, then please do think about subscribing. Simply hit the little icon in the bottom right hand corner of your screen now, and it's all done for you. I find that frequently when I'm playing, I'm not necessarily consciously thinking about the notes that I'm playing all the time. And in fact, I'm sort of expecting that my fingers, well, actually my brain just knows which notes it needs to play. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this per se, okay? Stephen Hough in his book Rough Ideas talked in a few places about, with tricky passages, the need to get things into his motor memory that lots of us call muscle memory. And clearly it's a way of making sure that we can handle complex things without needing to think about each individual note. However, I think that at some level we still do need to know what these notes actually are. How can you bring out an inner line if you don't know what the notes are? How can you finally judge rubato if you don't know what the notes are? If you're having a problem with your muscle memory, how do you know how to fix it if you don't know what note you should play? And that's where this strategy that I've called the power pause comes in. And in fact, it was sort of inspired by that famous quote from Franz Liszt, where he said we should think 10 times and play once. So let me explain in more detail how I do this. So let's then talk about how we can use this to fix muscle memory. Now, by this, what I mean is, let's just say that over time we find that there's a wrong note that somehow has crept into our playing of a particular piece, or maybe we've discovered a new fingering that we want to use, and even though we've practiced that new fingering and we can now get it right, whenever we play the piece through, for whatever reason, our old muscle memory automatically comes back and we go back into the old fingering. And in fact, this happened to me with Debussy's Clair de Lune. Now, this is a piece that I've played pretty much for as long as I can remember. And okay, I took a 20+ year break from playing piano, but it's something that has always been in my fingers, so to speak. However, that said, I always felt that short section in C# minor never felt particularly secure, and it was only after I'd read Rami Bar-Niv's book The Art of Piano Fingering and also seen a discussion on a Facebook group that it occurred to me quite simply the reason it was never so secure was because in fact the fingering I'd always used wasn't particularly well adapted for my hands. What I tend to find is that, at a slower tempo, pretty much any fingering scheme can be made to work with practice. But as we speed up, they soon fall apart if they're not very well adapted. When I first learned this, for whatever reason, I simply fingered those chords as just being a sort of a rolled arpeggiated chord in a 5-finger position. And as you can see here, that position doesn't particularly suit my hand very well. When you have smaller hands, it's actually generally a good idea sometimes to cross the thumb, perhaps more often than instinctively you might think you would want to. So I restructured my fingering so that I do it now in this way. However, now to implement that, it means I need to overwrite 30-odd years of muscle memory to something new. And whilst with the usual type of exercises that we do, I soon enough got the fingering itself comfortably enough in my fingers. I always found when I was playing through the piece, I would just go back to the old fingering, and no matter what I did, that always happened. And this is where the power pause comes to our rescue. So the idea is that we consciously say, okay, just before I start the part where I've changed my fingering, I'm going to pause, I'm going to think, I'm going to visualize the new fingering, work out where my hands will be moving, and then and only then actually move on and play the notes. And what I found is basically when we do this, it stops the brain from automatically invoking the old procedure and helps it to realize that there's a new procedure that it now needs to use. You might find that it takes a little time to do this. Certainly I think that as we get older, it seems to take longer to learn things than it did from memory when we were much, much younger, I guess. So now let's think about this then in the context of tricky passages. And by this, I'm talking about, those fiddly little bits that appear in pieces that we otherwise feel we play relatively well. So say the Chopin fioritura that you get in a lot of his works. Now, in cases like this, we will have spent probably lots of time working on the individual little things, in isolation. And in my tutorials on the A-flat waltz and the E-flat nocturne, I give practice tips on how we can work on these fioritura to get them under our fingers. However, I've also then found that when we put them back into the context of the piece, it's easy for them to sort of fall apart. And perhaps this is because maybe I spent too much time practicing them without fixing the problem and, fluffed my way through it, and therefore the fluff comes back. Or perhaps it's just that, psychologically, I know that I'm going to find this little bit a bit tricky and I sort of tense up mentally or physically, and again, it falls apart. And this is where the power pause can really help. So, in a case like this, what I would do is immediately, either before the first note of the tricky piece or on the first note of it, pause, relax, think about the notes that I need to play, think about how I want them to sound, think about the fingering that I'm going to be using, and then take a deep breath and play through the notes that I want to play. And this is something I found that works in lots of places, that little sort of cadenza-esque bit in Constellation No. 3 from Liszt, many other pieces that I've played that have got, a tricky little passage in them. The idea of having the power pause to think through what I need to do rather than going straight on into it has always helped me get much, much more secure with these problems so that effectively they no longer fall apart. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but quite often when we play something from memory, if we were challenged to say what notes we're actually playing, we simply don't know. And again, this is a feature of what we call muscle memory in general. And the problem with muscle memory is that it's notoriously fickle when we're under pressure. Quite often, if we have a memory slip, then we can't restart where we are. We have to go back maybe even to the beginning or certainly to the start of a section, say. Now, this happened to me when I attended the online performance workshop with Graham Fitch. I was presenting the Bach Siloti Prelude to get advice and tips on how to practice this more effectively. And when I tried to play the opening bars, for whatever reason, I couldn't get past the third bar. My brain was completely blank. I think it took me 3 or 4 attempts before I could actually get into the piece itself. I think again that the power pause can really help us here. So the way we can use the power pause in something like this is, as we play through something, then at random places, just stop playing, pause completely and close your eyes. Then try to visualize what notes come next. Can you see them in your mind's eye? Would you be able to say what those notes are? Do you know what fingers you're going to be using? And you'll be surprised, well, certainly I was surprised, that it's frequently that I'll sit there thinking, actually, I haven't got the first clue what comes next. When you do that, then open your eyes and maybe if you're very lucky, muscle memory will kick back in and it will allow you to play through, but more often than not, it doesn't. And this is where we need to then go back to the score and remind ourselves what those notes are, rather than trying to start the procedure off from earlier on in the piece again. just go look at the score and see what the notes are. See if you can even remember what fingering you use for those particular notes. And if you can remember all of that, then of course, restart them from that place, exactly from the point at which you stopped last time or you paused last time. Now, I found this to be a particularly useful exercise for any, let's say, important piece, right? So for me, I'd say an important piece is something that I'd intend to play for my friends, or maybe that I'm going to record to stick on my Facebook page. Or certainly if you were doing exams or recitals or anything, then the pieces that you're going to play are important. And we do want to make sure that if we're playing from memory, that our muscle memory is securely backed up with other types of memory as well. And this is a very, very useful way of putting ourselves under some pressure to make sure that we're backing up our muscle memory properly. And to be honest, even if you do intend to play from music, it's probably still a useful exercise anyway, because how many times do we momentarily lose our place on the score when we're reading from it? So it's good to have some idea of what comes next. Now, you might notice that I've tried to keep using the word pause rather than stop during this video. And that's because I think fundamentally, I'm not trying to interrupt the flow by doing this. I'm just trying to build in an opportunity to think about something that I expect might be a little difficult for me, and then be able to play it without too much trouble. And what I found, strangely enough, is that even without trying to, these pauses just naturally seem to become shorter and shorter the more often you practice, until eventually, you know, to the naked eye, so to speak, or the naked ear, they pretty much disappear. They become imperceptible without even trying. And I think ultimately that's because our brains can process information much, much faster than we think. And once we get used to these, whilst maybe mentally that tiny little pause is still there, the brain still does that, you know, recheck, if you like, about what it needs to do next, and then carries on. Nobody listening to it will ever know. So do give this a try in your own practice sessions and let me know how you get on. If you're not already, then please do subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner. Don't forget to hit the little bell icon so you're notified of new videos as and when they're released. I do thank you very much for watching and look forward to seeing you very soon.